All right, Chief Kick-A-Bitch of the Slap-A-Hoe Nation. Are we ready for
Here we
story
go.
time?
How long is it?
We're about to find out.
All right.
It's on the lengthy side,
Okay.
so we'll try to rip through this really quick. Charlie and I were lucky to grow up before the libs sucked the fun out of being a kid. During the summer after second grade, we started playing with Dynamite.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Unlike Pugsley and Wednesday, excuse me, we couldn't get it by the stick, but we could get a pound or so per week in half-ounce chunks, and sometimes close to half a pound a day off of my brother without his knowledge.
Nice.
Like Pugsley and Wednesday, we knew how to have fun. Back in the 60s, my oldest brother worked for the railroad, and one of his jobs at the rail yard was to make sure the safety kits in the caboose on every train were properly stocked. One of the items that often needed replacement was the track torpedo or detonator.
Mm-hmm.
They were small charges, about a half an ounce of dynamite wrapped in paper or tin glued to a 5-inch strip of lead. The strip would be wrapped around the rail head on both sides of the track. The weight of the train wheels would detonate the charge, signaling the engineer that there was an emergency on the track or a fog bank ahead to slow down. It's kind of like how they triggered the bomb in Die Hard with a Vengeance.
Wow.
A little further on, the second set meant stop if there was a train stuck on the tracks ahead. Even if none were used on a train during a trip, the kits often needed restocking. Most of the missing ones disappeared when train crew members took them to have fun with at home. Back then, no one cared. They were cheap and unregulated, not worth the expense of accounting for them. My brother often came home from work with his coat pockets stuffed with them in winter or in his backpack when the weather was warmer. He often forgot to put them back in the supply shack at the end of his shift. One day I asked what they were, and he unwisely told me. From that day on, I would check his coat or backpack while he took a shower after work. I always took 3 or 4 and sometimes more. He had no idea how many he came home with and refilled his pockets when he went back the next day. He could never remember whether he took them home or not, so I just started taking them all, up to 15 at a time.
God damn.
The first time I showed them to Charlie, I had half a dozen. When I told him they were dynamite, he said, "No way." I answered, "Way." We were both afraid to light one because we had nothing to fuse it with, but Charlie had an idea.
Electric detonating.
Of course he had an idea. We walked to the abandoned lighthouse at the end of the stone jetty and started throwing them off onto the rocks below. That didn't work. They would not go off. We had a drawing board. We went back to it. Our next idea panned out nicely. We opened 3 of them and stuffed the contents into one of the Tampax tubes that we lifted off my sister, and we used a wick we pulled from one of my brother's M80s. We put it under an inverted paint can and lit it. We wanted to see how high it would lift the can. It blew the can apart.
It disintegrated it.
Too bad those fuses were totally inadequate for what we planned next. Oh boy.
Here we go.
We decided to blast a tree stump in the woods a mile or so from our homes. It was about 1.5 feet in diameter and 5 or 6 feet high. We knew of many stumps, but this one was located in a place that offered the best concealment and escape route. Several days before we blew the stump, phrasing, we explored the adjoining wetland area, extra phrasing, that went on for about a mile toward the west. We were blazing a trail through the dry areas to get us to a road far enough away to avoid encirclement. At a couple places, we had to pile up rocks and dirt to create stepping stones above wet areas. We had our route planned out. We practiced to see how fast we could run to where the cattails began. We learned a year earlier not to run if you can't get outside their perimeter when 2 squad cars pulled into a public schoolyard next to a wooded area when we were setting off ladyfingers. They left almost immediately, but we didn't see them leave since we were in headlong flight to exit the woods on the street furthest from them. That's where they were waiting for us and would have caught us if not for Charlie's cautious nature. He held me back in the undergrowth to scope out the situation and saw them first. We waited for them. We outweighted them and left the way we came in near the school. Very smart. We thought going to ground after blowing the stump would get us caught. We had no idea how much trouble we would have been in at the time, but the whipping we knew my father would lay on us was reason enough to plan things carefully and thoroughly in advance.
Evil genius.
Yes. Our town, West Haven, was also called Waste Haven because many areas were used for illegal dumping of all manners of trash. Charlie and I would take our tools to dismantle any dumped appliances we found for the copper tubing and wiring in the motors. We dismantled them to sell the copper and any brass we found to the scrap metal and rag dealer who cruised around slowly in his truck, blowing the horn and calling out junk man as he drove. When the horn stopped working, he called out, "Beep, beep, beep, yeep, junk man." We heard that cry so many times I can hear his voice in my mind thinking about it. He gave us 20 cents a pound for copper and a little more for brass.
Hmm.
He also bought cotton rags for a nickel a pound, and Charlie and I would climb into apartment house dumpsters and pick the trash on Sunday nights in search of old T-shirts and anything else made out of cotton. Our friends were lazy and lacked imagination. They were always broke, but Charlie and I always had money in our pockets.
That's right. I used to do the same shit.
It took a while to work out a method of safely detonating the charge we were going to put together. My brother had acquired one of those lanterns that attached to a honking big battery. He took it home from work, left it in his car, and forgot about it. We acquired it with the intention of crafting an electric detonator.
I knew it.
There you go.
All right, because that's what I used to do.
We had plenty of wire. All we had to do was unwrap the coil in a refrigerator or washing machine motor. We had a couple dozen to take apart sitting in the shed in Charlie's backyard, as well as car radiators, alternators, starters, window motors, etc. We ended up using a much smaller motor from an electric fan. The wire was long and thinner, whereas a refrigerator motor had about 2 to 3 pounds of heavy gauge copper wire. We didn't want to use that much money since we would have to abandon our stuff to run.
Mm-hmm.
True story. We loved science and had an older brother who loved to tell me cool shit. He dumbed the science classes down so I could understand some of it. We applied some of the theory he taught me by joining 2 wires and using the short to generate heat, but couldn't get that to work. We also tried overloading a resistor, but had the same problem.
Yeah, model rocket igniters.
If we could have made it work, we would have stuffed the wires into our improvised dynamite sticks and used heat to trigger the charge. We tried using 2 wires separated by a matchstick to create a spark inside an M80. That worked, but we had only one M80 and couldn't get more no matter where we looked. While we were pondering the problem, we took a break at the town's only hobby shop to use their slot car track. It cost 50 cents each per half hour to race on their 6-lane electric track. We never made it to the track at the back. Hanging on pegs behind the front counter were packs of 50-foot coils of cannon fuse with different burn rates.
Boom!
We had never noticed them before. At that time, hobby cannons were in a legal gray area, so powder and fuses could be sold. We bought 100 feet that burned at 3 seconds per foot. Given a choice, always go low-tech.
Yep.
We took empty paper towel cores, cut 4 slits in each so we could fold the flaps inward to create a cylinder sealed at both ends. After stuffing 6 of them full and taping them together, we set out to the woods near Painter Park with our bomb to the pre-dug hole under the stump. During the previous couple weeks, we'd use a garden trowel to dig it. We tied 15 feet of cannon fuse to the short fuses inserted to each of the improvised dynamite sticks, placed the bundle under the stump, lit it, and ran like hell for the swamp.
Nice.
The noise would have been deafening had we not been at least 200 yards away when it exploded. We were well into the cattails singing Running Like a Dog Through the Everglades from Everglades by the Kingston Trio when it went off. And run we did as fast as our 8-year-old legs could carry us. After following our trail on the high ground above the swamp, we made it out to the paved road that looped around to within 2 blocks away from the scene of the crime. We stopped into the Cumberland Farms there for a pint box of ice cream each to eat as we headed home. We had no spoons, so we peeled the carton bit by bit and bit off mouthfuls until it was gone.
That seems legit.
Yeah. Most people were litter bugs in those days, so we just dropped bits of the cartons as we walked and ate. We walked to within a block of where it seemed that every cop car in the city was gathered and turned left instead of continuing on. Good plan.
Nice.
The Town Crier, a weekly paper later renamed the West Haven City News before it was renamed again to the West Haven Voice, carried the story 4 days later. The police had no leads and no suspects, despite grilling the kids they found on the scene for hours. They were held at the police station for a few hours and released after interrogation proved fruitless.
Nice.
We laid low for a few days before going to check out the results of our work. We were afraid to go straight there, so we took a couple of mixing bowls from our mother's cupboards to fill with blackberries from a patch near Ground Zero before just happening to pass it on our way out of the woods. The stump was gone, and in its place was a hole 5 feet across and a little more than 2 feet deep. A week later, we found what was left of the stump caught up a tree about 75 feet away. The blackberries were sweeter than any we had ever had before.
Nice.
We set to work on a larger device, intending to use it to drop a 50-foot tree. We changed our minds when the paper came out the following Thursday. The article on the blast mentioned the number of windows broken on the houses directly across the street from the tree stump. The risk was too great, so we turned our attention to dynamite fishing.
Why not?
Why not? Yeah. The local ponds had nothing but frogs and catfish, and we didn't want to kill frogs. Yeah, frogs are nice, but fuck those fish. Am I right? Wanted to try for flatfish in the Long Island Sound when the flounder were running, but didn't know anyone who had a boat. We tried off the end of the old rotting pier a quarter mile from our homes, but the only things we caught were menhaden and some small fish the size of minnows. Gave up on that idea and went back to blowing up stuff with smaller charges. The pier was falling apart and dangerous. That gave us the idea of blowing out the supports, but there was no cover, and when we inevitably got caught, we'd be connected with the Painter Park incident, and my brother would lose his job. So we stuck with 4-ounce and smaller charges.
Yeah, I bought an M3000 out of the back
Nice.
of a comic book, and I was 8 years old, and I electrically primed it and blew it up in the backyard.
Nice.
I got totally fucked over.
Watch Grunt Speak live every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And if you want to join Pop for Supporter Sundays, go to redonkulous.com/donate and make a monthly pledge. A link is in the Meat Gazer box.